Welcome to Executives at the Edge, a podcast brought to you by MEF. I'm your host, Pascal Menezes. Join me as we explore thought-provoking perspectives from the leaders and changemakers who are propelling enterprise digital transformation forward. Well, I'm really super excited to have John Nolan. He's the CEO of Sage Management. John and I go way back, and John is just a privilege to work with. And this is going to be a super exciting episode. So with that, John, maybe you can talk a little bit more about your background and about Sage Management itself.
Thanks, Pascal. It's great to be working with you again. Obviously, we've done some stuff together in our past. I'm one of MEF's biggest cheerleaders in terms of the progress you're making with the LSO Sonata APIs and how it's advancing the industry. When I retired from my former employer, I went to work for one of my suppliers. It's a company called Sage Management. They're one of the oldest and I think best carrier bill audit firms in the industry. They've been around 20 years, saved their clients over $4 billion.
And so exactly what does Sage Management do?
Sure. So primarily for U.S. carriers, although there are applications outside the U.S., Sage comes in and with some of the technology and experience they've developed, the depth of people and resources they have, they audit your bills. And we know from experience that in the carrier-to-carrier billing space, there's errors on roughly 10% of bills. So there's a lot of money out there that carrier customers overpay, or that if you're the seller is subject to refund at some point. And that's often a source of tension between buyer and seller when they transact and they have those sorts of disputes. We come in and find them, help resolve them, and recover that money for them.
Now, the telecom space has a real challenge in this area, right? Because there's a lot of disputes, right? And the disputes cost a lot of money where they don't get back their money. Can you help our listeners understand how this thing flows and this dispute issue?
Well, even though the carrier-to-carrier ordering and buying has gone back for decades, it's still a very complex ecosystem, if you will. There's regulatory things. There's just contract implementation things. So if you negotiate a new contract, does your ordering team necessarily put the right PNUM on an Ethernet order so that it flows through and gets billed correctly? Oftentimes they don't. It takes a while for those errors to be caught. So I like to use the example, if you overbill me by $1 and it takes me 3 years to find the error, you probably don't want to give me all $36 back. In fact, statute of limitations would say you only had to give me $24 back, and then we often negotiate something less than that. So you as a seller have revenues subject to refund. I'm now mad at you as the buyer because you've overbilled me for the last 3 years, at least in my mind. And so what we do is we come in, we help clean that up, and we've got some unique and I think exciting solutions that we've partnered with MEF on in order to prevent those billing errors from happening in the future.
And those billing errors can go to billions of dollars, correct?
That's right. It's not uncommon to see tens of millions of dollars in dispute for large carriers. In my personal background, there have been disputes that have, gotten above $100 million with suppliers, and that's a source of friction and tension between buyer and seller. So if there's a way to eliminate those, it certainly bodes well for a future where we're looking to implement, NaaS, and have a federation where you can move faster and provide better services to our end users, but do so in a way that doesn't have those errors.
Yeah, so this is kind of like the old way of doing things, very manual. People have to go through it. You have people have to scan through stuff. It's really, really old-fashioned, correct? And now we're going to talk about what you're doing to modernize all of this.
It is in a lot of ways. We've got some machine learning and some algorithms and some stuff that we've learned over the years so that we can come in and quickly implement audits that you frankly can't get to if you just have your own internal team or one other auditor on staff. We've got some intellectual property that we're pretty proud of. And then in conjunction with MEF, working on smart contracts and a blockchain-based solution where it really cleans your inventory and eliminates billing errors from occurring going forward.
So before we go to that, just one question. So how long does these disputes go for? Can they go on for like a year?
Generally, they take a while to resolve. Oftentimes, there's some interpretation or other things that come into play, but it's not uncommon for some of these things to take years to resolve.
Wow, that's a lot of money left on the table.
That's right.
Okay, so now what's your thoughts on how to progress this into a much more automated way, a modern way?
Well, I know you've heard me talk about what I believe to be the three-legged stool on multiple occasions. It starts with ordering with better intelligence up front. So friends like Ben Edmonds at ConnectBase, what he's doing with location truth. And then in the middle, or the second leg, you've got the MEF-Sonata APIs. Can you get order status, open trouble tickets, get trouble ticket status? All those things that today take time and back and forth, can you streamline that? The third leg is, can you implement smart contracts so that essentially buyer and seller can clean their existing inventory, and then on a go-forward basis, each new order is resolved before it's ever installed. Think of it in the old days, we called it first bill review. You're essentially doing a first bill review before it ever gets installed. You can do that with a low-cost solution. In the past, there have been some larger carriers who've implemented private blockchain solutions. What we're talking about here is a public blockchain solution, similar to the MEF APIs, that you can implement it for one relationship and then copy and paste to others.
So what I'm hearing is in MEF, we've created this APIs, which you're obviously massively influential in creating the ecosystem and the adoption in your former position. And what you're saying is two entities now use automation APIs to now, instead of people or machines people or faxes or emails, they are basically two machines talking to each other through APIs. And we call that the order API as an example. And in the order, one party says, I'm going to place an order to you. And they finally say, okay, I agree on the order, and they have a transaction number, correct?
Correct.
And they both agreed on that transaction. So it's like, hey, I place an order on Amazon, we agree on it, I'm good to go. So second idea, right? Now, additionally, in the middle, there's a smart contract that takes those transactions on the order. And the smart contract is a codification of what to do in logic, right? So can you help us, our listeners, what does it mean, smart contract?
Sure. So basically a buyer and a seller each have expectations. And so you run it through the Sage MEF platform, if you will. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about the technical aspects of the solution, because I think when you hear words like blockchain, people think cryptocurrency and things like that. So yes, it's a complicated solution, but you've got a buyer and a seller both expect something. You run it through a zero trust infrastructure and a platform that Sage and MEF have built to look at it, reconcile it. If it agrees, it gets spit out and loaded onto a distributed ledger as an immutable record of both parties agree. If it doesn't match, it gets spit out and quickly resolved between the parties. So before you ever get that first bill that you find out months or years later is wrong, you're working through those issues up front. It virtually eliminates all disputes.
And that's kind of what you're at. That's the modernization of the
That's the goal. The goal isn't better audits. The goal is no audits. No overbilling, no underbilling, no disputes between parties.
Really, that's amazing. So let me just recap what you just said. So the order APIs between two parties, they're placing an order, they agree on the order, so there's mutual endorsement.
Correct.
And this smart contract, the API is plugged into the smart contract, or it's part of that, the API transaction. Smart contract sits in the middle. They have both, the smart contract looks at that order. They can see, and in code, they can see they've agreed on it. And now it takes the transaction number, puts it into a public blockchain, right, versus a private blockchain.
And it's encrypted. I don't want people to think that information's out in the public.
But just a transaction number that both parties agreed on that. So they keep their own what the data of that transaction number is, but they agreed on the transaction number. The transaction number is encoded, encrypted, and further notarized, stamped by like a notary saying that, that you can trust that transaction number. I just simplify everything.
That's correct.
Is that what I'm saying?
So you're not leaving money on the table as a buyer. You're not overpaying. The other ugly truth is, I mentioned it in my example. Besides the time value of money that you've lost, if you've overpaid and only get a portion of that back, you potentially have tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that over time are leaking out the bottom of your business. So when you think about the business case for implementing this, you really need to factor that in. A world that has no disputes, you need fewer people. You don't have monies that you're overpaying that you don't ever get back. I think that is a pretty compelling business case to fund investment in this sort of technology.
And now talk about, so what are the challenges and what's the solution from Sage Management?
So from a challenges perspective, I'd say that there are several different ways of looking at carrier billing. There's the first that says, I've got it under control. I don't need any help. If I do need help, I'll hire more people. Plenty of people do that. You'll never find everything. Second path is the example where you bring in somebody like a Sage, or there's other folks out there who do carrier bill audits. We have a breadth of view that you can't have as a single carrier. So we can help you with that, but we take a cut of it. So, there's still money that is leaking out the bottom. And then the MEF-Sage smart contract solution, where we clean your inventory, both parties agree it's clean, and then going forward on an order by order, circuit by circuit basis, you're basically reconciling those before it ever gets installed. You no longer have disputes. So it's a virtuous cycle.
So do you have this solution now available?
We do. We've got a implementation up between several carriers using public blockchain, but we also are, using private blockchain, but we have public blockchain ready to go for the next iteration.
So when we talk about many of the providers coming in and joining together, and when we talk about network as a service, and the resources have to be elastic across all of these partners in the supply chain, because a customer wants that, like up my bandwidth for the night because I need backup, lower the bandwidth the day. Otherwise, they have to buy the highest bandwidth all day long and they're paying extra. So those kind of use cases, what we call elasticity, is a very powerful use case. The problem is, and the challenge has been, they don't know how to build correctly in the old way. But in what you're describing for network as a service and the elastic resource capability, this solves the problem, correct?
It does. And it's funny you use that example, because I used the same one. In a world where 10% of the orders that get placed have some sort of an error on them that results in a dispute down the road, imagine a world where you need to up your bandwidth on a Friday night for a SaaS implementation. You turn it up at 7:45 p.m. You turn it down when you come out of the maintenance window Sunday morning at 3 a.m. and everything's working, but your supplier doesn't have somebody in the office till Monday morning at 8. How do you reconcile when you stopped using that additional bandwidth? So the commercial model for those services has to catch up with where the technology is going. And you have to think about ensuring that you don't take a legacy model that I believe is broken and apply it to that new world.
Which really makes sense, because if they do automation with the 2 orders, then you could now put that to the smart contract and track it and all that stuff. So what's stopping this? I mean, it's common sense. It's so easy. It makes sense. What's the issue?
I think it's a little bit of people need to step back and realize the bigger picture, the money that's being lost on both sides. If you're a CFO at a large company, publicly traded, privately held, it doesn't matter. If you've got revenues subject to refunds, your auditor's probably not going to be too happy about that. If you're leaving money on the table and you're privately held, when you go to transact at a multiple of X times your EBITDA, you're leaving money on the table. And from an enterprise value, that can be a lot of money. And so thinking about cleaning up this space, I think pays for the implementation, but oftentimes the people that we're talking to, are down in the engine room, so to speak, thinking about the solutions and where they can apply the technology versus the larger business problem that somebody needs to ensure there's a solution for.
But isn't in some way you're displacing their human jobs because of automation? So maybe these people are against this idea. But the CFO should be, I don't lose money, as you talk about lose money on the bottom. So why doesn't a CFO go, this is a no-brainer, I'm going to not lose any money? So does the CFO needs the auditing firms to say this stuff works? Or so give me some idea.
I think that the people that are engaged with MEF, certainly at a leadership level, I think this will begin to resonate with them as they start exploring things like NaaS and the business models that they're going to put into the marketplace. I think the realization that you've got money falling on the floor is something that nobody wants to explain to their boss or their finance department. So yes, I think it has the potential to displace some people, but I would argue you take those people and put them on higher value functions, where they can drive more value. We're implementing some AI-based tooling where, I think I heard you speak this morning about agentive AI. We've got something called Spend Brain, where you'll be able to have a conversation with your contracts, multi-source inputs into tell me about this, tell me these things, and get that back. I'd argue that the people that are displaced on some of that lower value work, chasing the billing error where you were overbilled for $1, could then be used to think about, okay, what about those circuits expiring in the next 6 months, and where do I have better options? What should I do with those?
Well, John, this is very exciting. I think it's been an exciting conversation. Now, you have really great expertise in this, right? I mean, you've been doing this you know this space inside out.
I've worked with some really smart people over the years, and I've learned a lot from them.
Okay. Well, John, thank you so much for your time. And as always, such a pleasure talking to you and being with you. So,
likewise, thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us for Executives at the Edge. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe today. Share online a review. Find all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform and at MEF.net.